Ugh! Those bastards! Reviewers, assemble! I need a collab partner!
One small thing doesn't seem like a lot. One small thing worked with the time you've got.
Glad we got one volunteer.
Huh? Wait, what's happening?
And that's why I want to review Father Knows Best with you.
Did you really have to kidnap me, boss?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Father Knows Best. I somewhat looked forward to this episode after I read the synopsis. Meeting Spike's dad sounded like a pretty neat idea, though I had my concerns from the get-go as the synopsis were vague enough that it might not be Spike's actual dad, but rather than a poster. Well, and guess what we got?
At first, I was skeptical. A dragon coming from out of nowhere claiming to be his father. It sounded too good to be true and way too convenient. But I figured maybe, just maybe, he might have been telling the truth. So I let that feeling slide. Looks like I was mistaken harshly. We aren't getting too ahead of the episode, are we?
If you really want a quick summary, a hobo dragon named Sludge crashes in Ponyville and injures himself. Spike and the main six nurse him back to health. Sludge likes living in the castle, so he lies about being Spike's dad and takes advantage of him. Spike admires Sludge's advice of how to be a real dragon, even though Sludge obviously makes up complete nonsense, and when Twilight voices her concerns regarding Sludge, Spike pulls the "you are not my mom" card, breaking her heart. But soon enough, Sludge is exposed as a liar and Spike learns that Twilight is his true family. Happy?
In all honesty, no. I am beyond not happy with this episode. You might want to get out a censor if you want my full thoughts. However, if you don't have one, I will do my best to be as family-friendly as possible. There are so many problems with this episode. I guess the best place to start would be Spike being too trustworthy of someone he just met and doing everything he asks. Spike should know from personal experience a Gree Dragon when he sees one. Hell, he was one back in Secret of My Excess. The fact that he is so blinded by hope and joy really ruins his character in this episode.
Well, it wouldn't be so bad if we as the audience could at least somewhat believe that Sludge is actually Spike's dad. But it is very apparent from the get-go that he just made it up because he really likes living in that castle. He says it over and over again how great that castle is, takes advantage of everyone, and when he hears that Spike is missing a father figure, he jumps at the opportunity. It's not even subtle. And his story is full of holes, and him stressing that he was locked up in a place even the Princess of Friendship never heard of makes it very apparent that he's just making things up as he goes. It would be slightly more believable if he would at least look somewhat similar to Spike, but nope, completely different color scheme. Not to mention that all of his advice is just terrible. It's not even real advice, it's basically just an excuse to spend as little time with Spike as possible, and it's just so frustrating that Spike takes everything he says as fact when he's obviously lying the entire time. There's no reason to believe him other than Spike wanting to believe him. Though, to be fair, his song is at least a little bit catchy.
I wasn't too big on the song. I mean, yeah, it was alright, good background noise I suppose. But you won't catch me singing it for fun anytime soon. But what you said about Spike wanting to believe him brings up another point, his idolization of him. And this is one of the points that makes me absolutely detest this episode. More than Super Speedy Cider Squeezy and Appaloosa's Most Wanted. This part hits extremely close to home for me. Growing up as a kid of divorce, I stayed with my mom since birth, never seeing my dad. Then he wants to start spending time with me more than just phone calls, and suddenly I start putting him on a pedestal without realizing it, and without realizing how much my mother was hurting. It wasn't until after she told me why she was so upset that I stopped idolizing him. I never in my life thought I would see something like this play out in a show like this, which brings me to another point immediately after this one. Spike broke Twilight. Oh, I'm a teenager and finally met another dragon who claims to be my dad, so I'll just blindly agree with everything he says and do whatever he asks. What's that, Twilight? You don't trust him? What would you know? It's not like you raised me from the beginning or anything. You are my real mom. No, that is a bullcrap excuse and you know it. I don't care if Twilight forgave you. You have officially became this season's, if not the series' worst character!
Are you done?
Yeah.
Now I can understand that this rubs you the wrong way. This line is pretty much a variation of the classic "You're not my real dad" line that pops up in pretty much every fiction ever that features a fatherless character when having a fight with his father figure, be it the adoptive dad, mentor, teacher, or whatever. Sure, it is a bad thing to say, but it usually happens in the heat of the moment, and 9 out of 10 times the character in question realizes that he shouldn't have said that. And 6 out of 10 times, said father figure usually dies before they can apologize. Frankly, I'm not a big fan of that trope myself, but I expect it to show up in stories like this. The problem is the presentation. In general, we have the right setup. Spike finally meets a person who he thinks is his actual dad, and he learns a lot from him. Twilight is pretty much telling him that his dad is bad influence on him, something that Spike of course doesn't want to hear. For him, this is a dream come true, so of course he snaps when Twilight dares to say something negative about his great dad. So, under these circumstances, it's not too weird that Spike plays a "you're not my real parent" card to end the argument. That's what every fictional character ever would do in this situation. Of course, the intention is that Spike learns his lesson at the end and realizes Twilight is his true family. And of course, he does so at the end. Though I'm a little bit disappointed that he didn't call her mom. But the actual reason this seems so frustrating is it's just so hard to believe that Spike actually buys into this stuff in the first place. The audience knows the entire time that Sludge is just taking advantage of him. If Sludge was Spike's actual father and not some random hobo just pretending to be his dad, this would have been easier to swallow. It would still be wrong to say that, but at least we could understand why Spike is so defensive of him. But nope, he takes a hobo over Twilight here. And that's just infuriating.
That brings us to my final point, the forgiveness that Twilight gives Spike. In my opinion, it was too easily given. I was actually talking to Vector about this issue, and we both agreed that it should have possibly turned into a 3-episode arc. Imagine it. After Twilight is hurt by what Spike said, he now has to try and repair the damage he has caused. However, since Twilight forgave him quicker than you can say sorry, Twilight, it makes it feel like he got off easy. I get that it's a cartoon and a kids show. However, this is teaching kids a bad lesson. Oh, I said something that hurt you beyond repair? Sorry. Okay, that makes it better, right? This is not how relationships work. This is another part that hits super close to home for me. When I was a teenager and my mom would take me to school, I said that I wished that I lived with someone else. I didn't realize how badly I hurt my mother by saying this until she went almost a full day without speaking to me. Forgiveness, as shown in the episode, doesn't work this way. It has to be earned and achieved. If you are lucky, then hey, maybe it might work for you. However, this is not true for everyone. They could have done so much more with this ending, and yet they chose to go with forgiveness ex machina.
I wouldn't exactly call that a Deus Ex Machina. Sure, it hurt Twilight, but in the end, she knew why Spike said it in the first place. She knew that she struck a nerve when she confronted him about Sludge earlier, and in the end, she was more worried about Spike than anything else. She truly loves Spike, and when she learns that Spike's dream of finally meeting his real family and learning where he came from has been utterly crushed, she pushed her own feelings aside. Twilight knows Spike very well. She knows how important the whole thing was to him, and she is also very aware that sometimes people say things in the heat of the moment that they didn't actually mean to say. For example, the thing Twilight said to Pinky in the movie. Remember that? Also, we don't know how much time has passed in the meantime. It was at least a day. Maybe it's a little bit idolized, but so is every work of fiction.
Okay, that makes sense. It still rubs me the wrong way that he got off so easy, but I can see your point. However, I am curious, why, after all this, didn't he just go to Celestia and ask where she got the egg? Now that would have been a great way to end it. Maybe even leave on a cliffhanger for the next season. It would also be kinda cool if we got a season 9 episode where he actually does meet his dragon parents, only to be put off by this experience and be untrustworthy of them claiming to be his parents. But those are just my thoughts on that.
I think the possibility of Spike meeting his real parents sort of died with this episode, but then again, I didn't expect him to grow wings either. Now, another thing that bothered me was that this episode was again about how Spike wants to become more dragon-like because he acts too much like a pony and so on. We've been here before, multiple times, and every single time, Spike learned that he is fine as he is, and it just gets tiring after a while. To this episode's credit though, it sets up its conflict rather nicely with Spike's flying lesson, in which he gets helpful advice from Smolder, who points out that this is the stuff grandparents usually teach their kids. So the setup that Spike could need some guidance from an actual dragon is pretty good, but going to the old "a real dragon doesn't do this" thing again is just repetitive.
I do like the fact that Smolder is willing to help him with his flying lessons at the beginning of the episode. Maybe this could be a tiny detail in future episodes that Spike goes to her when he needs some guidance. Well, here's hoping anyway. All in all, I did not care for this episode. My end thoughts? This episode is bad, and it should feel bad for ever being made. It got a lot of people's hopes up, and then they got dashed with what happened. The story was good and executed well, I will give it that. However, the way Spike was portrayed was in a horrible light, and set his character back in my opinion. All I hope for now is that he has a better episode to make up for it. We've had a couple before, so why not have another one or two before the end?
Smolder's inclusion was easily the best thing about this episode. This showed us very little with the newly introduced students. We had a Hippogriff episode without Silverstream. We had a Yak episode without Yona. They just feel kinda wasted. Smolder is the only one who seems like an actual worthwhile addition to the cast, as the writers are somewhat forced to include her in Spike-centric episodes that are about him being a dragon. Sure, she mostly serves as Miss Exposition, but overall she has a nice dynamic with him, and since Spike seemingly is too young for Ember, I guess it's only logical to ship him with Smolder now?
You just had to bring up shipping, didn't you?
Well yeah, last time I checked you were into shipping.
My ships are private!
Well, whatever. Father Knows Best is sadly a step down after we had 5 pretty good episodes in a row. Such is easily one of the most despicable characters in the show. It is way too frustrating to see that Spike believes his obvious lies, and Spike breaking Twilight's heart is a bit too cruel to watch. I don't really think it's the worst Spike episode, it is still leagues ahead of Princess Spike, but that boy still deserves better than this. But what about you? Did you like this episode? Anything that bothered you? Let us know in the comments. I am Tricky Fox. Stay foxy. Can I go home now?